The autumn wind swept through Eastwood Park, rustling amber leaves across the cracked pavement. On a weathered bench near the main path, two boys sat side by side, silent, shivering, and far too serious for their age. They were twins, unmistakably. So, same tousled hair, same freckled cheeks, same tight grip on hope that refused to let go. Between them, carefully displayed like an offering, rested a red toy car. Its once glossy paint had dulled at the edges, worn from years of play, but the doors still opened, and the wheels spun freely. To them, it was a treasure. But today, it had a price. "Someone's gotta want it," whispered Levi, the older by 3 minutes, his small hands nervously turning the car over. "It's the coolest car ever," Eli nodded, his voice dry with hunger. His stomach growled audibly, but he didn't flinch. They hadn't eaten since yesterday's meager breakfast, but food wasn't the priority. Their mother, pale and too weak to sit up, lay in their crumbling apartment 3 blocks away. They needed money. Now. "Let's try over there," Eli said, pointing toward the crowded path where office workers bustled by in tailored suits and sharp heels. The twins moved to a spot just off the sidewalk, strategically close to foot traffic. Their identical blue eyes scanned the faces of strangers with desperate hope. "Excuse me, sir," Levi called to a man in a trench coat holding the toy car up. "Would you like to buy this? It's really fast, and the door's open." The man didn't stop. He didn't even look down. For over an hour they repeated the pitch over and over. Some people smiled apologetically. Most ignored them. One woman dropped a few coins in Levi's hand and hurried off. They didn't chase her. She hadn't taken the car. "We have to try harder," Eli muttered, his voice cracking. "Mom needs the medicine today." Across the park, a black luxury sedan pulled up to the curb. From the back seat stepped a tall man in a sleek gray suit. His name was Grant Callahan. 41 years old, founder of Callahan Systems, one of the city's top AI and robotics firms. The world knew him as a visionary, a shark, a man who built an empire by seeing problems before anyone else did. But Grant didn't believe in fate. He believed in data, strategy, execution, and timing. "I'll walk the rest of the way," he told his driver, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored coat. "Meet me on the East End in 15. He strode into the park with purpose, mind already sorting through tomorrow's quarterly projections. He barely noticed the children lining the benches until a voice cut through. "Sir, would you buy our car, please?" He stopped mid-step. The tone wasn't whiny or cute. It was sincere, urgent. Grant turned. 2 boys stood on the path. Their clothes were worn, their faces pale, their posture tense. One of them extended the toy car toward him like it was something sacred. "We're selling it," the boy continued. "It's fast. The wheels really work. We take good care of it." Grant looked down at the object, a simple toy, cheap plastic. But it was spotless, as if it had been polished before they left the house. "How much?" he heard himself ask. The twins looked at each other. "Whatever you can pay," said the one holding the car. "We just need to help our mom. She's really sick." Grant blinked. For a moment he didn't see their faces. He saw another boy, years ago. A different voice. A different pain. He reached into his wallet and pulled out $300 in crisp bills. He didn't know why he did it. He just knew he couldn't walk away. "Here," he said, placing the money gently into the boy's hand. "Will this help?" The boys stared at the bills. It was more than they'd imagined. Levi stepped forward and placed the toy in Grant's palm, holding it with reverence. "Thank you, sir," Eli said, voice trembling. "This will help our mom a lot." They turned and ran down the path, clutching the money tightly between them. Grant stood frozen, the toy car still in his hand. He should have walked away. Let them be. Let the moment pass. But he didn't. Instead, he turned to his driver, who stood waiting discreetly nearby. "Follow them," he said quietly. I want to see where they live. The car rolled slowly a few blocks west, past graffiti-covered walls and rusted fire escapes. The twins disappeared into a run-down brick building with chipped paint and cracked windows. The kind of place Grant had spent years forgetting existed. He stared at the entrance. It would have been easy to leave. He'd given money. He'd done his part, but the toy car still rested in his hand. It was absurd, really. Such a small, insignificant thing. And yet it felt like a weight. "Wait here," he told his driver. The stairwell smelled of mildew and cheap disinfectant. He climbed 4 flights, following the echo of voices. A faded apartment door stood ajar. One of the twins spotted him. "It's the man from the park," he whispered. The door opened wider. Behind them, on a thin mattress, lay a woman, mid-30s, sunken eyes, damp forehead, labored breathing. "Can I come in?" Grant asked, voice gentler than usual. After a pause, they stepped aside. The apartment was bare. A few dishes, a broken chair, nothing more, but it was clean. "My mom's sleeping," Levi whispered. Grant approached the mattress. The woman stirred, her skin flushed with fever. "She needs a hospital," he said quietly. "We don't have money," Eli said, almost ashamed. "That's why we sold our car." Grant stared at the toy again, still in his pocket. Still inexplicably. "Important. I'll take care of it," he said. The boys looked stunned. "How will we ever pay you back?" Levi asked. "You already did," Grant said, nodding toward the red toy car. "You sold me this. Now it's my turn." Without waiting for approval, he gently lifted the woman in his arms. The boys followed, wide-eyed, as he carried their mother, down 4 flights of stairs and into the back of his car. "Where are we going?" Eli asked, clutching his mother's hand. "To people who can help her," Grant replied. The door closed. The car pulled away, and the red toy car sat quietly in his pocket, still warm from the hands of a child. The emergency room doors slid open with a mechanical hiss as Grant stepped inside, carrying the unconscious woman in his arms. Behind him, Levi and Eli clung to each other, their wide eyes darting nervously across the sterile, fluorescent-lit lobby. "She's running a high fever," Grant said, stepping aside as they gently transferred her out of the vehicle. A nurse approached with a wheelchair, followed by 2 attendants who eased her down. Grant rattled off her symptoms: exhaustion, weight loss, difficulty breathing, as if they were bullet points from a corporate report. The nurse asked about insurance, name, emergency contact. "She's not insured," Grant said without flinching. "But I'll cover everything. My name is Grant Callahan." He handed over a sleek black card, platinum and corporate, his signature, already known to most of the hospital's administration. The nurse hesitated only briefly, before motioning for the boys to sit in the waiting area. "She's in good hands now," she said, kneeling beside them. Levi stared straight ahead, fists clenched. Eli's lips trembled as he pressed his palms together in silent worry. Grant remained standing, watching as they wheeled her away. "They've already taken blood work and are preparing her for imaging," the nurse informed him. "It's likely kidney failure. She'll need immediate dialysis." "She's been sick for weeks," Grant said, his voice lower now. "They've been trying to take care of her alone." The nurse raised an eyebrow, glancing back at the twins. "Are you family?" she asked. "Yes," Grant said without hesitation. "Yes, I am." He didn't look at her as he said it. He wasn't sure who he was convincing more, her or himself. The hours passed like days. The boys sat slumped in molded plastic chairs, whispering to each other occasionally, their heads bobbing from exhaustion. Grant remained silent nearby, a fixed point in their new chaos. Finally, the doctor approached. She was severely dehydrated, dangerously anemic, and her kidney function is critical, the doctor explained. Grant stood up alert, while the twins leaned forward, eyes wide. "She'll need ongoing dialysis, but we've stabilized her for now," the doctor continued. "We've moved her to the observation unit. You can see her shortly." "Will she get better?" Eli asked, barely audible. "With continued treatment, yes," the doctor said, offering a measured smile. "But it'll be a long recovery." "I'll cover whatever's necessary," Grant said immediately, handing over signed forms without being prompted. It was only once everything settled, the wires connected, the doctors satisfied, and the nurses turning down lights, that Grant finally allowed himself to exhale. Levi and Eli stood beside their mother's bed, too tired to cry, too alert to sleep. Catherine, he had heard her name only once, spoken faintly by one of the nurses, lay motionless, but her breathing had steadied. "Is Mom going to die?" Levi asked, not turning to look at him. "No," Grant said with more conviction than he felt. "She's getting the best care possible now." Eli looked up at him. "What happens now?" he asked. "We can't stay at the hospital." That moment, those words, cut sharper than any shareholder meeting or courtroom accusation. Grant stared at them. These two boys in oversized coats and second-hand shoes, with no one left to hold their hands. "You'll come stay with me," Grant said, the decision rising up from somewhere he didn't know existed. "Just until your mother's better." Levi blinked at him. "Your house must be really big," he said quietly. "It is," Grant replied, and this time he did feel a flicker of discomfort. "There's plenty of room for both of you." Too much room, he thought. More than enough for a dozen families. When they returned to the mansion that night, the boys fell silent in the back seat as the city gave way to manicured hedges and winding roads. The house appeared at the end of the drive like something out of a storybook, elegant, pristine, and cold. Grant stepped out first, pausing to look up at the estate's glowing windows. The twins followed slowly, clutching each other's sleeves as they reached the grand front steps. "You live here alone?" Eli asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not tonight," Grant said, holding the door open. The inside of the house was quiet, oppressively so. The air smelled faintly of polish and pine. Everything was in its place, untouched, preserved. Mrs. Hendricks, the housekeeper, emerged from the hallway with a raised eyebrow and a dish towel in hand. She froze when she saw the two boys behind him. "They'll be staying here for a few days," Grant said before she could speak. "Set up the East guest suite and make sure they have clothes, food, everything." "Of course, Mr. Callahan," she said, giving a curious glance toward the twins before disappearing back down the hall. The guest room looked like a 5-star hotel suite. 2 beds, crisp white sheets, a fireplace that flickered to life with the press of a button. "This room's bigger than our whole apartment," Levi said as he stepped inside. Eli wandered over to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain. Outside, the lawn rolled on endlessly beneath the moonlight. "Do you think Mom's okay?" he asked quietly. "She's stable," Grant said. "The doctors will take good care of her, and I'll take care of you." The boys nodded, but didn't answer. The silence that followed was heavier than anything Grant had felt in years. He turned off the lights and closed the door behind him. In his study, he poured a glass of water he didn't drink and sat behind a desk that no longer gave him any sense of control. The red toy car sat on the edge of the desk, catching the soft glow of the antique lamp. He picked it up, ran his thumb across its scratched hood, a child's treasure, traded for a sliver of hope. He should have forgotten about it. Instead, he slipped it back into his pocket. Perfeito. Vamos continuar com o próximo capítulo, mantendo o estilo de narração para vídeo com falas integradas à descrição, transições suaves e fluidez emocional. Morning sunlight filtered through the high windows, painting long gold bars across the polished floor of the guest suite. Levi blinked first, waking to the unfamiliar softness of the mattress beneath him. He sat up slowly, brushing sleep from his eyes as the realization settled. They were still here. The mansion hadn't been a dream. Eli lay curled on the opposite bed, his hair a mess of curls against the snow-white pillow. A knock came at the door, soft, polite. "Breakfast is ready downstairs," Mrs. Hendricks said from the hallway. "Come when you're ready." Levi nudged his brother awake. "Come on," he whispered. "There's food." In the kitchen, the long oak table was covered with a spread neither of them had ever seen in person. Stacks of pancakes, fresh fruit, bacon, eggs, and a glass pitcher of orange juice that looked like it belonged in a commercial. Mrs. Hendricks set 2 plates in front of them and stepped back. "Mr. Callahan said you boys should eat as much as you want," she explained. "And then he'll check in before heading to the hospital." Eli didn't hesitate. He started with pancakes. Levi followed. They ate like they hadn't in weeks, because they hadn't. Mrs. Hendricks watched them from the counter, arms crossed gently over her apron, eyes softening. "Do you like maple syrup?" she asked as Eli reached for the butter. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Well," she replied, placing the bottle next to his plate, "then it's a good day to find out." Upstairs in his study, Grant buttoned the cuff of his shirt and glanced out the window toward the driveway. He could hear faint clinks of silverware and the soft hum of voices below. It felt strange, not unpleasant, just new. The twins had arrived only last night, but already the silence of his home had shifted. He checked his watch and grabbed his phone. "The boys are settled," he told the nurse when she answered, "and I'll be there within the hour." "Any updates?" "She's still resting," the nurse said. "Her vitals are holding. Dialysis is scheduled for this afternoon." "I'll be there before then," Grant replied. Downstairs, he found the twins exploring the hallway that led to the library. Eli was crouched near a vent, listening for some imagined sound, while Levi admired the chessboard on a pedestal stand. "There's a telescope in the other room," Levi said when he saw Grant approach. "Do you use it?" "Sometimes," Grant answered, watching as the boy traced a finger along the chess pieces. "Do you play?" "No," Levi said, "but I want to learn." "I'll teach you," Grant said after a pause. "If you're still here this weekend." Both boys looked up. "We're not going anywhere until Mom's better," Eli said. "You promised." "I remember," Grant said, "and I meant it." Mrs. Hendricks arrived at the end of the hall, gesturing toward the farthest door. "They tried going in there," she said. "I stopped them." The twins exchanged a guilty glance. "We didn't go inside," Levi said quickly. "We just wanted to see what was in there." "That room is private," Grant said, his voice quieter but firm. Eli looked down. Levi stepped back toward the wall. "Understood," Grant added, softening his tone. "You can go anywhere else, but that room stays closed." The tension faded. The boys nodded. Later that day, they returned to the hospital. Catherine had been moved to a recovery room, her color improving slightly, her frame still fragile. Her eyes lit up the moment the boys appeared in the doorway. "My boys," she said with a weak smile as they ran to her bedside. Eli wrapped his arms around her carefully. Levi pressed his cheek against her shoulder. "We're staying in a castle," Eli announced, pulling back to look at her. "There's a telescope and secret doors and a giant kitchen." Catherine's eyes shifted toward the man standing just behind them. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice raspy. "There's no need," Grant replied, his gaze resting on the boys. "Just focus on getting well." The doctor entered with updated charts and walked them through her recovery plan. 3 dialysis sessions per week, a specialized diet, and monitored rest. "She's stable," the doctor confirmed, "but she'll need consistent care for months." Grant didn't hesitate. "She'll have it," he said. On the drive back to the mansion, the boys sat quieter than usual. "Why are you helping us?" Levi asked suddenly, his voice cutting. Through the low hum of the car, Grant looked out the window for a long moment before answering. "Because sometimes," he said, "people just need help." Eli watched him for a moment longer, then leaned back against the seat. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Grant stood outside the door to the room he always avoided. The locked one. The room no one entered. His fingers brushed the handle, but he didn't turn it. Not yet. Instead, he walked the long corridor in silence, the sound of laughter faintly echoing behind him. From the guest room, the boys' voices overlapped, retelling stories, arguing about who would use the telescope next, planning what to show their mother when she came home. The mansion had always been a monument to success, built high and wide, filled with glass and polished wood and quiet, too much quiet. Now there were footsteps, voices, life. He paused on the stairs, hand resting on the banister. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. The next morning began like the guy last, with sun slipping through tall windows and the faint clatter of plates in the kitchen below. But something in the air had changed. The boys were adjusting. Grant found them already dressed, eating cereal at the kitchen island, their feet swinging off the stools. "Mrs. Hendricks says we're going to the hospital again today," Eli said, his mouth half full. Grant nodded and set his phone down on the counter. "Your mother's dialysis is this afternoon," he said. "You'll be able to visit after." Levi looked up from his bowl. "Can we bring her something?" he asked. "Like a card or a picture?" "She'd like that," Grant said. The boys ran off toward the art room, formerly a sitting room no one had used in years, already bickering about what to draw. Grant watched them disappear around the corner. He almost smiled. Upstairs, the house remained quiet, though not in its usual way. It was no longer a silence of absence. It was potential, movement, breath. Mrs. Hendricks passed him in the hallway, arms full of folded linens. "They've claimed the back garden," she said with faint amusement. "Tried to convince Terrence, the gardener, to help them build a camp fortress, using leftover patio chairs." "I'll cover damages," Grant replied. She stopped and looked at him. Really looked. "You're changing," she said softly. He didn't answer. Down the hall, a door stood closed. The one door. That afternoon at the hospital, Catherine sat up. In bed, her hair brushed back, her skin still pale but no longer gray. The color had returned to her cheeks in soft degrees. The twins exploded into the room with drawings in hand and voices louder than a hospital room probably allowed. "We made you a card," Eli said, holding up a construction paper collage of hearts and stars. "It says don't give up because we know you're still fighting." "It was my idea," Levi added, clearly proud. Catherine laughed, a dry, fragile sound, but a laugh nonetheless. "You boys," she said, holding the card to her chest. "You're the reason I'm fighting." Grant remained near the door, his presence steady, unobtrusive. Catherine looked toward him and nodded once in thanks. She hadn't asked many questions about why he was helping. She didn't need to. "You've taken care of them," she said after a while, her eyes meeting his. "They're good kids," Grant replied. "They are," Catherine said. "They've had to be." As the boys gathered at the edge of her bed to tell her about the garden and the telescope and the chessboard they hadn't yet learned to use, Catherine rested her head back against the pillow, watching them with quiet wonder. "You can stay a little longer, right?" she asked. "We'll be back tomorrow," Grant said, glancing at the time. "And every day after, until you're home." On the drive back, the boys were unusually quiet. Not from sadness, but from thought. Eventually, Levi leaned forward. "You have kids?" he asked. Grant kept his eyes on the road. "I did," he said. "A son." "What happened?" Eli asked. There was a pause. "There was an accident," Grant said finally. "A long time ago." The rest of the drive passed in silence. That night, long after the house had gone still and the lights had dimmed, the boys crept down the hallway. They moved in, practiced quiet, careful not to wake Mrs. Hendricks or Trigger. The motion lights, their destination, the closed door. They didn't try to open it. They didn't have to. Eli crouched beside the frame, ear pressed to the wood. "Nothing," he whispered. Do you think there's treasure in there? Levi asked. Like a hidden safe or something? Maybe it's a lab, Eli replied. Or a secret office. I think it's a kid's room, Levi said after a beat. For his son. They looked at each other in the dark. We should go back, Eli whispered. But as they turned, a light came on. Grant stood at the end of the hallway, barefoot, silent. The boys froze. You're not in trouble, Grant said, walking towards them. But that room stays closed. I told you. We didn't go in, Levi said quickly. We were just curious. I know, Grant said, stopping in front of the door. He looked at it for a long time, his hand resting lightly on the doorknob. It belonged to my son, he said. Eli looked down at his feet. Levi waited. What was his name? Levi asked quietly. Matthew, Grant said. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. The boys nodded, and without another word turned and walked back to their room. Grant stayed behind. He placed one hand on the door, his thumb touched the keyhole, and then, slowly, he walked away. In the morning, the twins pretended nothing had happened. They bounded into the kitchen asking for waffles and strawberries, as if the hallway conversation had never taken place. Grant followed their lead. Some wounds didn't need reopening. But as the day passed, something had shifted. During a break between his remote meetings, Grant joined them on the patio. Levi pointed toward a tree. We saw a hawk, he said. Right there. You sure it wasn't a crow? Grant asked. It had a white chest, Eli said. We looked it up. It's a red-tailed hawk. Impressive, Grant said. Eli looked up at him. We like it here, he said without hesitation. Grant didn't reply, but a flicker of something passed across his face. That evening, while Mrs. Hendricks cleaned up after dinner and the boys played a loud game of imaginary ping-pong. Down the hall, Catherine called. She sounded stronger. They were so full of life today, she said. It's the first time in weeks I've seen them that light. They're adjusting, Grant replied. You've given them safety, Catherine said. Stability. It's not something they've had since their father passed. They're remarkable boys, Grant said. They are, Catherine repeated. But that kind of resilience only shows up when the world gives you no other choice. There was a pause. I'd like to start looking for an apartment soon, she said. I know this was temporary. Grant looked out the window. The garden lights cast long shadows across the lawn. There's no rush, he said. I need to start planning, she said gently. We can't stay in your world forever. Grant didn't argue, but as he sat alone in his office later that night, the red toy car resting again in his palm, he realized something. He no longer wanted to be alone in that world. The fever came without warning. It started with a cough, dry and stubborn, that Levi tried to ignore as he and Eli sorted through a basket of library books. But by evening, his face was flushed and his body had gone limp on the couch. When Grant entered the room, Levi barely lifted his head. He's burning up, Eli said, standing beside his brother with wide, terrified eyes. Grant crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling to press the back of his hand against Levi's forehead. He's running a high fever, Grant said, already pulling out his phone. I'm calling my physician. He'll be here within the hour. Mrs. Hendricks appeared in the doorway, her eyes narrowing with concern as she took in the scene. I'll prepare the guest room nearest yours, she said. Easier to monitor him through the night. Eli hovered beside the bed, refusing to move. Grant pulled a blanket over Levi's trembling form as the boy murmured something incoherent. I don't feel right, Levi whispered, voice barely audible. You're going to be okay, Grant said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Help is coming. The doctor arrived quickly, a man in his 60s with a calm voice and a stethoscope that looked older than Grant's company. He examined Levi with practiced efficiency. Nothing critical, he said after checking vitals. It's a common virus. Lots of rest, fluids, careful monitoring. Is it connected to his mother's condition? Grant asked. No, the doctor replied. Just bad timing. Still, Grant didn't leave Levi's side, even after the doctor left, even after Eli fell asleep in the chair beside the bed. He sat in silence, listening to the soft hum of the air vents and the occasional cough from the boy. Around midnight, he rose to get a glass of water. When he returned, he found Catherine sitting in the chair where Eli had been. She looked thinner than before, her skin still pale, but she had walked herself in without help. I had to see him, she said, brushing a hand across Levi's damp curls. They told me at the hospital you'd brought him home early. You should be resting, Grant said, his voice quiet in the dark. She shook her head slowly. I wasn't going to sleep anyway. They sat for a long time without speaking, the only sounds the distant ticking of a hallway clock and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath them. He looks so small, Catherine whispered. He's strong, Grant said. He'll be better by morning. Catherine leaned her head against the back of the chair, exhausted. You stayed, she said, even though he's not yours. He is, Grant said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Catherine closed her eyes. Moments later, her breathing steadied, slow and even. Grant rose and brought her a blanket, draping it carefully over her shoulders. Then he stepped into the hallway and turned toward the room he never entered. The door stood waiting. No footsteps. No voices. No one watching. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the small brass key. The lock clicked. Inside, the air was stale but untouched. The room remained frozen in time. The walls were painted a soft blue, scattered with faded stars and planets. A twin-sized bed sat beneath the window, the covers still slightly rumpled. On the shelf above the desk, a neat row of toy cars lined up, each one clean, positioned with care, and on the nightstand, a framed photo. Grant, a smiling boy with messy hair, and a woman with sunlight in her eyes. Sarah. He picked up the photo and stared at it for a long time. Then, from the doorway, a quiet voice broke the stillness. Is this Matthew's room? Eli asked, his eyes round in the dim light. Grant turned sharply. Eli stood barefoot in pajamas, one hand gripping the doorframe. You shouldn't be in here, Grant said, but the words came without heat. I heard the door open, Eli said, stepping inside. I wanted to see. His gaze swept the room, slowly landing on the shelf of toy cars. We had one just like that, he said, pointing to a red one near the edge. Before we sold it, Grant set the photo down. Matthew loved cars, he said. He used to line them up by size. He knew the names of every model. Eli walked to the shelf and peered up at the lineup. I think our dad did too, he said. He gave us the red one. It was the last thing we still had from him. There was a pause. Do you miss Matthew? Eli asked. Every day, Grant said, his voice tightening. We miss our dad too, Eli said. Mom says it's okay to be sad, but that we shouldn't forget to be happy either. Grant stared at the boy. I didn't think I'd ever feel happy again, he said. You kind of do now, Eli said, glancing up at him. You laugh sometimes. Footsteps approached from the hallway. Levi stood in the doorway, pale but awake. You opened it, Levi said. The door. It was time, Grant said. He watched as both boys entered slowly, moving through the room like it was sacred ground. That's a cool rocket lamp, Levi said, pointing to the nightlight by the bed. Matthew hated the dark, Grant replied. He sat on the bed, gesturing toward the bookshelf. He loved space, he added. Said he was going to be the first kid to build a city on Mars. Levi smiled, clearly intrigued. My science project is about space, he said. You think Matthew would have liked it? I think he would have loved it, Grant said. A shadow moved in the hallway. Catherine stood at the door, one hand pressed to her chest, as she watched her son sitting beside this man, in a room full of grief and memory. "I'm sorry they intruded," she said gently. "They didn't mean—" "It's all right," Grant said, looking up at her. "They belong here." Later, after the boys had gone to bed and Catherine remained in the hallway, Grant stayed in the room, sitting on the bed, holding the same red toy car that matched the one they had sold in the park. "He was 5, Grant said. "It was a Sunday afternoon. We were driving back from a picnic. A truck ran a red light." Catherine entered and sat beside him. "I walked away without a scratch," he said. "They didn't." Catherine reached over and placed a hand on his. "You've been carrying that weight alone for too long," she said. "That's not strength. That's punishment." "I didn't know how to let it go," Grant said. "Maybe you don't have to let go," she said. "Maybe you just have to stop hiding it." For the first time in years, he didn't argue. The morning after the door had opened, the house felt different, not louder, though the twins still argued over cereal and took turns banging their spoons against the kitchen counter, but fuller, somehow, like it had finally exhaled. In the study, Grant sat at his desk, staring at a document he'd read 3 times but hadn't absorbed. The photo of Matthew on the shelf beside him had been dusted by Mrs. Hendricks earlier that morning. She'd said nothing when she saw it was no longer hidden behind a locked door. His phone buzzed with an incoming message. "Catherine. Doctor says I might be able to move to outpatient treatment next week. I'd like to talk when you have time." He stood immediately. She was waiting for him on the terrace, wrapped in a sweater and drinking tea in the early sun. The color had returned to her face. Her posture, while still tired, had regained the strength he remembered from the hospital room. "The boys are in the garden," she said without turning. "They're building something with sticks and mud. I didn't ask." "Probably a castle," Grant said, sitting across from her. "Or a trap." Catherine smiled faintly and set her mug down. "I've been looking at apartments," she said. "I didn't want to start without telling you." Grant remained quiet. "I'll need something." "Close to the hospital," she continued. "At least for a while. But affordable, which limits the list." "You don't need to do that yet," Grant said, his voice low. "I do," she said gently. "We've been here longer than I expected. You've done more than anyone could." "Ask." Grant looked at her carefully. "I haven't minded," he said. Catherine glanced down at her hands. "I know," she said. "But we can't stay in limbo forever. The boys are getting used to this. The house, you, calling you Mr. Grant like you've always been part of their lives." "They're remarkable kids," Grant said. "They are," Catherine agreed. "But they've also lost a lot. And I don't want them to lose this too." Grant leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "And what if I asked you to stay?" he said, the words emerging before he could stop them. "Not as guests, not temporarily." Catherine blinked, taken aback. "You mean, what exactly?" Grant hesitated. "I mean, all of it," he said. "Stay here, with me, with the boys, not as a debt, not out of pity, because I want to build something real, with you." Catherine's gaze softened, but her voice stayed steady. "Why now?" she asked. "Because I thought I had nothing left to give," Grant said. "But I was wrong, and I don't want to go back to the way it was." She didn't respond right away. "It's not just my decision," she said at last. "I have 2. Boys who've already been through too much." "Then talk to them," Grant said. "I'll wait." That afternoon, the boys found him in the garage, where he'd been checking on a faulty door sensor. Eli clutched a notebook. Levi was carrying an empty fish tank. "We found a turtle," Levi said without preamble. "By the pond. We named him Nugget," Eli added. "Can we keep him?" Grant looked at the tank, the scribbled notebook labeled Turtle Habitat Blueprint, and the 2 hopeful faces. A turtle requires proper care, he said. You'll need to build a real habitat, the right lighting, filtration. That's a commitment. We know, Eli said. We researched everything. Grant nodded slowly. Then we'll build it tomorrow, he said. Together. The next morning, they did. It took most of the day, digging, assembling, adjusting the water heater. Grant worked beside them without complaint, covered in mud and sweat by midday, laughing when Nugget attempted his first clumsy climb over a stick wall. Catherine stood at the edge of the patio, watching him. The man who had once lived inside a fortress of marble and silence now knelt beside two muddy 10-year-olds, adjusting a heat lamp for a turtle. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, after Nugget had been successfully transferred into his new home and declared official mascot of the back garden, Grant poured 2 glasses of wine and found Catherine in the library. I forgot how exhausting turtles can be, he said, handing her a glass. They say if you can survive building a turtle habitat together, you can survive anything, Catherine replied, curling up on the sofa. A quiet laugh passed between them. One of many now. The nonprofit I applied to offered me the job, she said after a pause. Administrative director. The pay's modest, but the hours are flexible enough for treatment. Grant's hand tightened slightly around his glass. When would you start? In 2 weeks, she said, if I accept. But it would mean moving out, he said. Yes. A long silence followed. The fire crackled in the hearth. Somewhere above, the house creaked as it settled into evening. You're still deciding, Grant said. I am, Catherine replied, because all of this, feels like something I didn't know I could have. She looked at him. And I'm afraid of what happens if I believe in it. Grant stood and crossed to the bookshelf. He pulled down a small velvet box and held it for a moment, fingers curling around it. Then he turned. I've been carrying this for weeks, he said, walking toward her. I wasn't sure when, or how, or if. He sat down beside her and opened the box. Inside was a ring, vintage, delicate, set with a deep emerald and flanked by tiny diamonds. Something old, something treasured. I'm not offering rescue, he said, or security, or any of the things I thought I had to prove. I'm offering a life, together, as equals, as partners. He paused. You, me, and 2 very persistent turtle engineers. Catherine looked at the ring, then at him. You're serious, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never been more, Grant said. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out, closed the box with trembling fingers, and held his hand. I need to talk to the boys, she said. I know, he replied. But I'm not saying no, she added. Grant nodded. That's more than enough for now. The sun rose slowly over the estate grounds, casting a warm, golden hue across the back garden. Dew sparkled on the grass, and somewhere near the pond, Nugget stirred in his custom-built habitat, unaware he had become the unlikely centerpiece of a turning point in 4 lives. Inside, the kitchen smelled of toast and cinnamon. Levi and Eli sat at the table, arguing over who had drawn the better turtle on the care instruction sheet taped above Nugget's tank. I gave mine a helmet, Eli said, pointing at his sketch. So he's ready for battle. Turtles don't go to war, Levi replied. They're peaceful creatures. They're warriors of patience, Eli insisted, like sensei turtles. Across the room, Catherine leaned against the counter, watching them. Her fingers brushed the velvet ring box in her sweater pocket, hidden for now, but heavy with meaning. She hadn't spoken to them about it yet, but she would. That afternoon, while Grant was in his study finalizing a quarterly report, Catherine called the boys into the library. They sat on either side of her on the reading bench, legs swinging beneath them. Do you like it here? She asked gently. It's the best place we've ever lived, Levi said without hesitation. Even better than the apartment with the bunk beds, Eli added. And Mr. Grant has real maple syrup. Catherine smiled softly. What if staying here meant some things would change? She asked. Big things. Like me and Mr. Grant becoming something more than just friends. The boys fell quiet. You mean married? Levi asked after a pause. Yes, Catherine said, watching their expressions. What would you think of that? Eli looked at his brother. Would that make Mr. Grant our dad? It might, Catherine said, if that's something you'd want. The silence stretched for a few seconds more, until Levi nodded slowly. He already feels like one, he said. Eli's voice was smaller, but certain. I'd be okay with it, he said, if he still lets us keep Nugget. Catherine laughed, pulling them both into her arms. I think that's a safe condition, she said. When Grant returned from his meetings that evening, the boys met him at the door. We need to talk, Levi said, folding his arms with exaggerated seriousness. Grant looked down at them. Did the turtle escape? No, Eli replied. It's about the other thing. What other thing? Grant asked, playing along. The thing with the ring, Levi said. The one you want to give Mom. Grant glanced up. Catherine stood at the top of the stairs, smiling. The boys moved in closer. If you still want to ask, Eli said, we think it's okay. But only if we get to be part of the deal, Levi added. All three of us. Grant knelt down in front of them. That was always the deal, he said. I was just hoping you'd say yes. That night, the family gathered around the fire pit in the garden. Catherine wore a navy blue sweater. Grant had finally loosened his tie. The twins passed marshmallows back and forth, competing over who could roast the perfect golden brown. At one point, Levi turned to Catherine. Did you say yes yet? He asked. I was waiting for the right moment, she said, then looked at Grant. He met her gaze, steady and unshaken. Well? He asked. Yes, Catherine said simply. We'll stay. I'll marry you. The boys whooped so loudly that Nugget retreated under a rock in alarm. For the rest of the evening, the world shrank to the circle of light cast by the fire. 4. Silhouettes laughing, telling stories, burning marshmallows, and building a life without quite realizing how far they'd come from where they began. The following morning, Catherine stood in front of the mirror, twisting the emerald ring gently on her finger. It's a little loose, she said as Grant entered the room. We'll have it resized, he said. Or I'll wrap it in string until then. She turned to him. You're sure about all this? She asked, though her voice held no doubt. I've never been surer of anything, Grant replied. Outside, the twins were already yelling for him to join them at the pond. Apparently, Nugget had tried climbing a branch they'd added, and it was a cause for full-scale investigation. Catherine watched him open the back door, slip into his shoes, and jog across the lawn. Not long ago, this man had lived in silence, his grief locked behind walls and sealed doors. Now he was chasing turtles and carrying art supplies, and in every step he took, she saw the man she had fallen for. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, but the one who had sat in the dark beside her son and promised everything would be okay. That evening, Levi walked into Grant's study holding a folded piece of paper. I made a family tree for school, he said, placing it on the desk. I put you in it. Grant picked up the paper. It was clumsy, drawn in pencil with shaky handwriting. But there it was, his name, connected with a line to Catherine's, and then 2 more lines down to Levi and Eli. I didn't know your middle name, Levi said, so I guessed it was something like Maxwell. You look like a Maxwell, Grant. Looked at him, emotion caught somewhere deep in his chest. Close enough, he said. Spring arrived in full bloom, scattering petals across the garden paths and warming the marble floors of the once silent mansion. The cherry trees were thick with blossoms, The air smelled of possibility. Inside, the house had transformed. Children's shoes cluttered the entryway. A framed drawing of Nugget the turtle hung crookedly on the kitchen corkboard. The formal dining room had become a hybrid of science lab, breakfast zone, and late-night homework refuge. 3 months had passed since Catherine had said yes. They hadn't rushed the wedding. Instead, they settled into a rhythm. Boys to school, Catherine to her outpatient treatments and part-time work at the nonprofit. Grant balancing board meetings with backyard soccer games and grilled cheese lunches. It was a life not built on grandeur, but on softness, on shared mornings and quiet evenings, on whispered goodnights and knock-knock jokes, on turtle feedings and spontaneous dance-offs in the living room. On a Saturday morning, as Catherine poured coffee and surveyed the chaos of her new kitchen, one boy crawling under the table to retrieve a dropped pencil, the other reading out loud from a turtle care book, she turned to Grant. "Do you realize we've become a cliché?" she said. The formerly broken billionaire turned soft by love. "I'll have that engraved on my next business card," Grant replied, sipping his coffee. Eli crawled out from under the table holding the pencil in triumph. "Don't forget. The part where you saved our mom and built a turtle mansion," he said. Levi nodded. "And how you let us turn your guest room into a moon base." "Your resume is impressive," Catherine said, nudging Grant's arm. He smiled, a little slower this time, a little deeper. That afternoon they drove to the lake, one of the estate's hidden treasures, a small boathouse, a wooden dock, and water that mirrored the sky. It had become a quiet haven for them. Catherine sat beside Grant on the edge of the dock, their feet bare, the twins racing up and down the shoreline in a game with no rules and too much laughter. "I spoke to the nonprofit director yesterday," she said. Grant turned toward her. "They offered me a full-time position," she said. "Flexible hours, remote options if I need them." "That's great news," he said, and meant it. "You should take it." "I did," Catherine said, watching the water ripple beneath their toes. "But I told them something else, too." "What?" "That I'd be keeping my last name, but I'd be adding another." Grant looked at her, his chest tightening with quiet joy. "You sure you're ready to share this circus?" he asked. "I'm already in it," she said. "Might as well take a bow." They kissed, briefly, just as Levi shouted from across the sand. "Did you just kiss? Gross!" "Are you going to do that at the ceremony?" Eli asked, sprinting over. "Because we need advance warning." Catherine stood and brushed off her jeans. "Well, you two are in charge of the rings," she said. "So you'd better behave." "We'll be perfect," Levi promised. "Like turtle-level perfect," Eli added. 3 weeks later, guests gathered in the blooming garden of the Callahan estate. The arch was covered in white flowers. The aisle was flanked by rows of folding chairs filled with close friends, a few surprise business associates, and the small circle of people who truly mattered. It wasn't a grand wedding. It was a quiet, one, intimate, earned. Levi and Eli walked down the aisle first, each holding a velvet ring cushion with exaggerated care. They wore matching gray suits and identical grins, their expressions full of pride and anticipation. At the end of the aisle, Grant stood waiting, wearing a tailored suit and a look of awe he didn't bother hiding. When Catherine stepped into view, wearing a simple ivory dress that fluttered in the breeze, Grant forgot every word he'd ever prepared. As she reached him, he whispered what came naturally. "You look like a beginning," he said. She squeezed his hand, steady and sure. "The efficient began. 1 year ago, 2 boys stood in a park holding a red toy car. They didn't know then that they were setting off a chain of events that would lead us here today. This ceremony isn't just about 2 people. It's about 4. A family forged by chance, strengthened by choice." As they exchanged vows, the twins stood just behind them, trying to act serious, failing gloriously. "I promise to show up," Catherine said, "even when life is messy, especially then. I promise to open every door, Grant replied. Even the ones I swore I'd keep closed forever. The rings were handed off without being dropped. Barely. The kiss was quick, warm, met with a chorus of cheers. Levi shouted, "Finally!" Eli added, "Can we eat now?" Later that night, after the guests had left and the sun had dipped behind the trees, Grant stood at the window of what had once been Matthew's room. It was no longer sealed, no longer sacred in a way that hurt. On one wall now hung a framed photo of the twins on the dock, arms around each other. Below it, a small shelf held both the toy car Matthew had loved and the one the twins had sold him in the park that day. "Second chances," Grant whispered. Behind him, Catherine stepped into the room, barefoot, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm good," Grant said. "Better than I've been in a long time." Outside, laughter echoed from the back garden. The twins were still up, launching glow-in-the-dark paper planes from the patio steps. "They'll sleep well tonight," Catherine said. "Eventually," Grant replied. They stood together, looking around the room once more. "I didn't think I'd ever be happy again," Grant said. "You didn't think you deserved it," Catherine corrected softly. He nodded. "But I was wrong," he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "And you have 2 very loud, very muddy, very persistent reminders of that," she said. He smiled and pulled her closer. Later that night, as they turned off the lights and the house settled into a quiet hum of sleep, Grant reached into his pocket. The red toy car was still there. He hadn't meant to carry it with him today, but somehow it had found its place beside his heart. A reminder that healing isn't linear, that love comes in unexpected shapes, that sometimes the smallest object, clutched by small hands in a public park, can set in motion the greatest rescue of all. Not theirs, his.